My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. In today's Gospel, Jesus tells us the story of an invisible man. Now, he's not invisible in the same way that the hero of the book, and now recently the film, The Invisible Man, is invisible. There, in the film and the book, the invisible man seems to have the power to make himself invisible. But the main character in Jesus' story today isn't invisible because he wants to be invisible, but rather because his dire poverty makes him so. He's invisible the way a lot of poor people are, or elderly people, or sick people are in our big cities and towns. So let's see what the story is. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "There was a rich man who used to dress in purple and fine linen and feast magnificently every day. And at his gate there lay a poor man called Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to fill himself with the scraps that fell from the rich man's table. Dogs even came and licked his sores." So he's invisible in the sense that he's never noticed by Dives, the rich man. Dives is the Latin for the rich man. Dives, who owns the house. He has wonderful clothes. He has wonderful meals every day. And he just never seems to interact with Lazarus, who lives at his gate covered in sores, clearly starving. And, well, for all intents and purposes, Lazarus is quite invisible to Dives. Well, Jesus tells us in the story that the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to the bosom of Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. So both men die. Lazarus going to the bosom of Abraham, that's a kind of waiting room for heaven. Before Jesus died on the cross, nobody could enter into heaven. And Dives is clearly sent, Jesus says he's buried, but we know that he is sent to hell. In his torment, Jesus tells us, in Hades, or hell, he looked up and saw Abraham a long way off with Lazarus in his bosom. So he cried out, "Father Abraham, pity me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." Only now does Lazarus become visible to Dives. In other words, only when Dives thinks that Lazarus might be able to do something for him. And yet the punishment of Dives is still really very terrible, and for us a bit mysterious. What was so bad about what Dives did? Sure, he was what we might call a bon vivant. In other words, a guy who certainly liked his fine clothes and his food and so on. So he lives it up, but that hardly is something that merits the torments of hell. So I don't think that was the main problem, even though, as we'll see in a moment, Jesus is clearly telling us it was a big part of the problem, or a cause of the problem. You, Lord, are telling us that the problem was that for Dives, Lazarus was as good as invisible. Sure, the eyes of Dives saw him, but not his heart. Dives didn't manage to see Lazarus with his heart. Now, what is this seeing with our heart? Well, it could be called fellow feeling, or another more technical word for it might be empathy, the ability to put ourselves in the shoes of others, to feel what they're feeling. Pope Francis, someday he may be called the Pope of Empathy, because he keeps stressing this. He uses, rather than the word empathy, he uses the word compassion. He begs us again and again, as Vicar of Christ, to be more empathetic towards one another, especially those who are weakest, often the most invisible in our societies. Pope Francis has even spoken about this parable, saying that, I'll quote, "Lent is a favourable season for opening the doors to all those in need and recognising in them the face of Christ, including all those Lazaruses that we pass each day. Each of us, he says, meets people like this every day. Each life that we encounter is a gift deserving acceptance, respect, and love. Jesus, help me. Give me your eyes. Help my heart to see, to go beyond what my eyes see. Let nobody be invisible to me. We see how for you, Lord, nobody is invisible. Often we see in the gospel how you are deeply moved. Often they're the words that are used. You're deeply moved when you encounter somebody, a leper, a poor widow. And not only with material poverty, but also with spiritual poverty. We're told in a certain point by St. Matthew that when Jesus saw the crowds, he was deeply moved. He had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. In other words, nobody to guide them towards God. So spiritual poverty, too, should be something that causes us great concern. Remember the great St. Monica, the mother of St. Augustine. Augustine, her son, was a very, very talented young man, but he had little interest in the Catholic faith. In fact, he was a bit of a tearaway. And yet Monica prayed for him. She chased him around Italy, trying to bring him to the faith, asking various bishops at the time to intercede or do something for her son. Augustine caused her so many tears that one of those bishops famously remarked, "It cannot be that the son of these tears should perish." He was clearly impressed by the way that Monica wept for her son. Of course, she won out in the end, and Augustine became Saint Augustine, one of the greatest saints in the history of the Church. Anyway, back to all that fine food and clothing that Jesus tells us about in the Gospel. Jesus, what is the relevance of all that to the story? Because clearly it's not bad in itself. Fine food and fine clothing is not evil. However, you, Lord, seem to be telling us something. The effect of this on Dives, the heart of Dives, is to blind him. His heart is bloated and blind. Unfortunately, he satiates himself with all these fine things to such a point that really the sufferings of others become invisible to him. There's a Russian proverb that I think sums it up quite well. The one who is full of food doesn't understand the hungry one. In other words, it's kind of hard to have empathy, to put yourself in the shoes of others if you have no experience of what they're going through. And in that line we could ask Jesus that our extra austerity in Lent, or being a little bit more sparing in our intake of the fine things, the good things of life, the food and the drink, the entertainment and the music, which are fine in themselves, but we have to exercise control and austerity. And we could ask Jesus to help us to be a little bit more austere in these things, so that our hearts would be more sensitive to the needs of those around us, that we would see their spiritual poverty, their moral poverty, their physical poverty, that they wouldn't be for us a Lazarus, somebody that is invisible for us because we're so content with ourselves, or even that we are wrapped up in our first world problems. That proverb, actually, the Russian proverb continues. It says, the one who is full of food doesn't understand the hungry one. For one, the soup is too thin. For the other, the pearls are too small. In other words, the man with the great poverty, he has real problems, thin soup. Whereas the man who never goes without, his problems are, his pearls are too small. First world problems, we might say. We're preparing ourselves for Good Friday, where we will accompany you, Lord, on the way of the cross and through your crucifixion. But we will also accompany Our Lady, and we'll witness once again that Our Lady is the world's most compassionate woman. It was never about her sorrows, but for her it was about the sorrows of her Son, and about the sorrows of others, and your sorrows and my sorrows. Mary, give me a compassionate heart. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.